Okay, so for part 3 of the course, Technology, Cross-Cultural Ministry, and the Poor, we're going to be covering a lot of material. We're going to be covering diffusion of innovation and a lot of related topics like the digital divide, the knowledge divide, and really how Christians can respond. So the basic idea on diffusion of innovation is that an innovation happens, and whenever the innovation happens, it takes a while to diffuse. Many of you have seen, the graph between the early adopters and other groups. But the part that we're focusing on in this section really is, what are the consequences of the innovation? What's the social implication? So, and there's different categories to think about. So, in the consequences of an innovation, there's desirable versus undesirable consequences. There's direct versus indirect, and there's anticipated versus unanticipated. So, one of the best examples of this is the automobile. A desirable consequence was that you're able to travel long distance. An undesirable consequence was that ultimately, you had the building of highways, and then people moved to the suburbs, and then all of a sudden you had urban blight and inner cities being run down. That largely was caused by the automobile, but I don't think there are very many people who saw that, and I think most people say that was undesirable, and it was an indirect effect. So another key parameter to think about for diffusion of innovation is what is its effect on equality. And there's two measures of equality and innovation. One is the level of good. So you hear the rising tide raises all boats. But sometimes it raises some boats a lot more than others, and other times it's going to decrease. Some boats are going to go down, so that there's going to be a overall net loss or a growth of inequality. Now, I'm going to show some of the charts, and if you look at the top, what this is this would be the total amount of income or good in a society would remain the same after innovation. So say the internet happens, and we don't know whether the internet's going to actually hurt the poor or help the poor in the long term. But one possible consequence would be that it is essentially neutral. So the total amount of wealth and distribution stays the same. The other possibility is that as innovations happen, the majority of the benefit of that innovation happens to the wealthy, and because of that, after the innovation, so this is the bottom curve, the wealthy end up getting more of the wealth, and that's really one of the overall trends of innovation. Now, various innovations affect things in different ways, but if you average all innovations, say over the past 30 or 40 years especially, there has been an increasing concentration of wealth at the top, especially, you hear this term, the 1%. A lot of that is actually technology driven if you look at a lot of the sources. And it's not necessarily bad, for the rich to get richer. That's not what's a concern. But if the gap between the rich and the poor gets wider and wider, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that this causes all sorts of problems. And we don't want to become a society that's more like a feudalist society where the kings own everything and then everyone else is just the serfs. So the way innovation gets diffused has huge implications in how wealth and inequality works in society. So I want to talk about different types of injustice now. Most people, whenever you talk about injustice, they think about racism, and they think about really the intentional individual racism. So they think about bigotry. So people who are intentionally racist, or for the rich, it might be people who are just intentionally selfish, or for the powerful, it might be people who are intentionally bullying. But the reality is, and this is at the bottom, Most people assume that injustice comes from quadrant 1, but I actually believe most of it comes from quadrants 3 and 4. So that's the bottom half. So on the right side, you have the unintentional things. So sometimes, you might unintentionally, cause an injustice just because you don't understand a culture. Or you may not understand someone's perspective, or you might be unintentionally offended. I've had a lot of my Asian American friends that, they say everyone expects them to outperform everyone else. So if they, work on a job, they have to work extra hard because that's just what is expected. Well, I would say that's an unintentional injustice that they're experiencing, where people may not understand that they have that bias. They're not intentional about it, but that hurts that person. And then you have the bottom half is the collective, or the systemic. And, as technologists and as engineers, part of the reason why we've emphasized, we have a course in systems, because tech people really influence systems, and that's one of the big things. So you can have intentional things where you have unjust laws. So whenever, our country had legalized segregation or apartheid in South Africa, then you have policies that create an unequal playing field. The fact that a lot of the taxes for the rich, Warren Buffett, who's one of the richest people in the country, says that he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. There's issues with that. There's intentional exploitation. Whenever you take, say, foreign workers, and you might exploit them, and the Bible says that you're supposed to care for the alien. And then there's unjust wars, where you just try to exploit resources and take the resources from another country, which is kind of what imperialism was all about. And then there's the unintentional collective. So it's just cultural encroachment and assimilation. So, whatever country you live in, often that country is going to be very assimilative. And that, if you're not from that culture, that's going to, be very kind of psychologically damaging for you. Then there's unintentional second order effect that's systemic. So I talked about urban decay happening, from the automobiles. And then there's just the natural momentum of systems, which is that, in the diffusion of innovation, part of the trends that's identified by Rogers is that the rich are really the first people to take advantage of that innovation, and because of that, that creates more momentum for the rich to get more resources, and then they get more innovations, and then the trend just keeps going that way. So, tech people focus a lot on this idea of digital divide, and I actually started with that. I came out of MIT, and I started looking at, okay, how do we help the poor? And the digital divide was a very important topic, and that's the gap between those who have access to technology and training with technology and those without, especially information technology. But then as I got farther into it, I realized that there's a larger knowledge divide, and that, would just be getting all education. There's a huge gap between, if you don't have a high school degree or you don't have a college degree, then you're going to be making, millions of dollars less over your lifetime than other people. And then with the knowledge divide, there's also the innovation divide. So that might be, you might know how to use technology, but you may not have access to the latest technology. You may not have access to the latest things. And then there's the resource divide, which is just, the gap between the rich and the poor. That's the thing that people talk about. And then even bigger than that is injustice. So each of these are a part of the big picture. So what I'm going to go into in the next part is I'm going to talk about really how we've gotten to this point of having this big divide, and where are we currently in history. So I'm going to go back and talk about the three waves of history. So if you look at the three waves of history, Alvin Toffler and a lot of other people have divided in between the agricultural age, the industrial age, and the information age. Agricultural age was primarily a rural society. Then we went to an urban society, and then we went to a virtual or digital information society. And if you look at going from a rural to an urban society, there's a huge growth in education, and the Sunday school movement is actually where all most elementary schools came from, where what they did is they taught kids how to read using the Bible, and then eventually government took over primary and secondary school, but the need for primary and secondary school really came from this move to urbanization, where those skills became more essential. Now, as we're moving from the industrial age to the information age, the need for higher education, the need for a college degree is becoming essential, really, to make it in the current economy. If you look at the beginning of the 20th century, something like only 15% of people were graduating high school. And everyone said, oh, people don't need to graduate high school. That's only for the people who are going to go off and do advanced learning. But over the course of the 20th century, it was decided that we need to get everyone to try to graduate high school. And now I think very few people would argue with that. I would say at the beginning of the 21st century now, we're basically where we were 100 years ago, except this time it's about higher education, where a lot of people don't have access to higher education, but to compete in the current economy, that's going to be essential. And part of the reason for that is if you look at a graph of where employment happens as an economy develops, it starts off, and this green part of the graph shows that early in an economy's development, almost all the jobs are in agriculture, and then all of a sudden you have industrialization that happens, and but then the industrialization is replaced with robots and other things. So then most of the jobs happen in services, and in services a lot of that is the information economy, and to really get the good jobs in services you need to have a college degree. So this is another way of looking at that. So if you look at low-income countries, what proportion of their economy comes from agricultural versus, or what proportion of their jobs in their economy comes from agricultural versus industrial versus services. Even in low-income countries, services are the largest. But if you look at high-income countries, only 2% comes from agricultural, 30% comes from industrial. And that's a dramatically decreasing percentage. So that's something that's important to understand. So if you look at what's happened in the percentage of jobs in the United States that are in manufacturing, the left side is actually percentage. They show it as a decimal, as a point. But you can see it peaked actually in World War II, where close to 40% of the country was employed in manufacturing. But ever since then, it's gone down to where now it's less than 10% of the economy. And the reality is, for a long time, people blamed, and they said, it's going over to, India or China, or, it used to be Taiwan or Japan. But the reality is that even more than that, China and these other countries, and even in the U.S., it's being replaced by automation. It's being replaced by robots. To where the cost of the robots is even less than the least cost humans now. So it's, this is a long-term trend that's not going away. So the question is, how do we educate people? And the problem is there's actually enough jobs out there. There's just not enough people who are educated between jobs. So if you look at, you break people up into, people who have less than a high school degree, some college, associate's, graduate, and you take the percentage of people in each category, and then you look at what are the jobs that are going to be in 2018, and what you see is there are way too many people who have either less than high school, or some college. So the difference over there on the right, minus 5%, means that there are tons of people applying for the same jobs. I saw a study that showed a McDonald's job in Chicago, and the average job that was filled had over 100 applicants. Now, whenever you're competing for a minimum wage job at McDonald's, and there's 100 applicants, there's something wrong. What you need to do is you need to get into a different market, and to do that, you need to get a degree. So where the majority of the growth of the degree is going to be is actually in associate's degrees, and then in bachelor's degrees. So, there's this big need for education, and there's the quote from H.G. Wells that human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. So if you look at the, what's happening to our cities, what's happening in injustice, a lot of it has to do with this lack of education. There's a gap of education between the jobs. So, how do we have more jobs than we can fill, but then we have more people looking for jobs? Well, the gap is education. So how do we avoid this catastrophe? Well, if you look at what's happened in bachelor's degree attainment by income, so what this chart here shows is it shows for the top 25%, that's the top line, how many, what percentage of them are getting a degree and a bachelor's degree. And then the next 25% by income, how many of them are getting a bachelor's degree, and then the bottom, 25% and the next quartile. So, and what you see is that bachelor's degree attainment has gone up dramatically. Something like 38.9 point growth between 1970 and 2010 for the top quartile, 19-point growth. So, what's happening is the world's becoming more and more automated. We're in this race with the machines, and one of the things that you watch the video of is the race with the machines, or you're actually partnering with machines. But to do that, you need education. And then you look at the bottom, and the bottom's really where there's catastrophe. So you have a 4.1 point growth over this 40-year period, and a 4.5 point growth, which isn't enough to keep jobs, and that's how you end up with a situation where you have 100 people competing for one McDonald's job. So if you looked at the percentage of the population 25 years and over who've completed high school or college, so what you can see is that if you look at bachelor's degree or more, it was growing quite a bit overall, and it actually flattened in the 1970s. It's been going up a little bit for college attainment, but there's a lot of reasons for why that happened. And part of the reason this is important is if you look at people's unemployment rate, what this next graph shows, it shows what's the unemployment rate, and this is during the last recession. And if you had a college degree, there really wasn't that severe of unemployment. Now, some of you may have been looking for jobs with a college degree, and it still feels like it. But what's severe is whenever you have 32% unemployment for people who have less than high school, or 21% unemployment. So what we're trying to do, if you really want to solve the unemployment problem, you need to get people educated so that they can move from the 32% unemployment to the 8.6% unemployment. So over the same period from the 1970s to 2000, if you look at what's happened in our city, so all of a sudden you had the growth of education slow down dramatically for the bottom half of the country. And the top half is doing well, but you look at what's happened in the imprisonment rate in the United States over that period. So the green line shows the black imprisonment rate, the white line shows the white imprisonment rate. And if you look at all of a sudden, it's almost flat all the way through the 1970s, and then all of a sudden both of them shoot up. Now the black line goes up dramatically, but the white line, if you actually look at it, percentage-wise, it's going up, 5 to, almost probably eightfold over that same period. So what's happening is you're having this bottom half of the country that's experiencing severe distress, and granted, people are making bad choices, but whenever that many people make bad choices, there's something else systemic that's going on. And at the same time, what's happened is there's been a dramatic growth of unwed births. So if you look at the total unwed, unwed births total, so that's the red line, it's grown from being less than about 5% going to something like 40%, almost 40%, and the rate for black birth is much higher. And part of the reason that's higher is because the manufacturing jobs provided most of the jobs to men in urban centers. William Julius Wilson showed that over half of jobs in inner cities were in manufacturing, and now that all those jobs are gone, all of a sudden you have these guys that, you've created a government system where it doesn't make economic sense to the women to marry them because they're going to be taxed more heavily, and the guys, in some cases, or in a lot of cases, they don't have jobs. So you're creating a system that is encouraging people not to get married, both economically and policy-wise. The real solution, I think, is God and education on a lot of these things. There's policy changes you can do, but I think that those are the two things. But the problem is that the cost of education has gone up dramatically. If you look at, between 1980 and 2010, you have normal inflation, which, goods are going to go up about 100%. But the cost of four-year college has gone up by 600%, so 6 times the rate of inflation. And then on top of that, you have the student debt. So who owes the most? People who are in the highest income levels after they graduate college, they don't owe that much. But if you're in the bottom 25%, you're going to be owing most of the debt. So that's part of the reason why the bottom 25% is much more cautious to go to college, because they understand that they're going to have more debt in the end. So the question is, how do we change this? And there's a group out there called the Lumina Foundation, and they've been challenging a lot of people to change the educational trajectory. So, and they have this graph here, and the blue line says if we don't change anything, this is how we're going to, if we stay on our current trajectory, by 2025, 49% of the country will have either a bachelor's or an associate's degree. But they said to really meet all the jobs that are out there, we need to be on this other curve where 60% of the country would have a job. And that's really what's needed to win the race with automation. If we stay at this bottom half, there's going to be mass unemployment and catastrophe. So a lot of what I just finished my dissertation. This is a lot of the material I covered in my dissertation. Part of what's happening is people have predicted that of the current jobs out there, about half are going to be eliminated in the next 20 or 30 years because there's going to be massive automation. It used to be that robots have displaced manufacturing workers. Now they're displacing everyone. They're displacing doctors, they're displacing lawyers, they're displacing computer programmers, and there's going to be a lot of displacement. So, how do you win in this race? I don't want to make people paranoid. The way you win is you got to learn. You got to keep learning, and you got to keep educating yourself and educating others. So, part of the solution for this is the church. So, if you look at the different groups out there, and we look at this through kind of our values centered. So there are tech Christians that are serving the poor. So there's not that many. I'd say that there's in the thousands. But then you have techs in Christian organizations. So my estimate is that there's probably about 77,500 full-time IT staff in Christian organizations. It could be, plus or minus 50% on that, but you're talking about 100,000 in that range. Together, all these Christian organizations have about $12.5 billion in their IT budget. That's still a tiny percentage compared to the 6.3 million Christians in STEM jobs. And of those, 71% are somehow involving computing. And then, if you look at globally, 50 to 100 million Christians in STEM jobs. So if you want to address the digital divide, the way you do it is you engage the entire church. Higher education, the university was invented by the church 800 years ago, and in many ways, we've lost a lot of it, but I believe that technologies present an opportunity for us to bring that back, and I think that is part of the vision of what we're trying to do in this master's program is how do we empower a lot of people to diffuse innovation out there. So getting back to the idea of diffusion of innovation. So how do you diffuse innovation? How do you get knowledge? So, each of you are going to be in a space and you're going to be trying to learn about innovations. You're going to try to learn knowledge. innovation is really just another name for cutting-edge knowledge or cutting-edge practices. So the mechanisms for diffusion of innovation are conferences, workshops, webinars, getting formal education, degrees, courses, lectures, media, books, videos, websites, magazines, software, open resources, employment, staffing training, networks, professional networks, association, informal networks of peers, programs, products, and their replication, personal, it could be consulting or word of mouth, could be open source software or open content. But as you're thinking about the mechanisms of innovation, the real area to focus on is who are the leaders in innovation in your field? Who's doing it better than anyone else? That's what you want to learn from. And often what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to blend different sectors. So I shared this with you before, but I'm going to do it again to share. So Tech Mission and City Vision, our values are Jesus, Justice, Technology. So what we've done is we've said that there's 3 sectors that we work with. There's the Jesus Justice sector, and that's the people who are more focused on deed, caring for people's bodies. There's the Jesus Tech sector. That's people who are word. We're supposed to balance word and deed in the Bible. But the reality is that a lot of the innovation happens in the tech justice sector. So that's where, you take the overall tech world, and how does the innovation from the overall tech world get diffused into the nonprofit sector, and then it gets diffused from the nonprofit sector into either the Jesus Justice sector or the Jesus Tech sector. So that's a very high-level map that we have. And then we have our program. So we have City Vision College, Christian Volunteering, City Vision Internships, and our master's program. And then we have the different groups. Now, I'm going to show you later how to map these in a mind map. This isn't a mind map. It's another way of, and you could graph it too, like I'm doing in a chart like this. But these relate to the mind map that I'm going to show you later. And it relates to your mind map project, because each of these are sectors that are domains that I can learn from. So in the Jesus Justice sector, I asked the question, where is the innovation happening? Well, there's the Christian social sector. How do I learn from that sector? Well, there's these conferences, AGRM conferences, CCDA conferences, Salvation Army, Teen Challenge, UIWI, World Vision. How do I take the innovations from all those organizations and pass them on to others? Then there's groups that are professional educators, so Christian Higher Education for Justice, so different groups that have degree programs in nonprofit management, urban missions, addiction studies. Then there's people who, they're just doing it because that's how they live, so Christian Higher Education in developing countries. Then there's churches of the poor, urban churches. How do I map the innovations that are happening there? And then, recovery, that's a big domain that we get into, and urban internships. So then you get into the Jesus Tech sector. And there you have the technology and missions groups like ICCM, LightSys, Missionary Aviation Fellowship. How do I take the innovations that they're doing and help diffuse those maybe to the Jesus Justice sector? Or, there's tech Christian colleges. There's a lot of groups that are out there, Christian colleges that are focused on technology. Then there are groups of Christian technologists, like the Christian Engineering Society. There's InterVarsity and Crew have different faculty groups. Code for the Kingdom, Christians in Tech. Then there's mega churches and other churches that have church tech. So Life Church, Menlo Park, Saddleback, Willow Creek. Technology and ministry. There's people who do Internet Evangelism Day, Mobile Ministry, YouVersion, Christian Recruiting, Meet the Need, Christian Jobs, ShortTermMissions.com, Parachurch IT like Crew, InterVarsity. Then there's the Christian media people, Christianity Today, Publishers, Radio, TV, and Christian funders out there. Each of these has a piece of the innovation puzzle, and we need to be learning from whatever your map is, you need to be learning that. And this exercise of creating your map, this is one of the most important exercises you're going to do in your entire degree program, not just in this course. This is going to be one of the most important exercises that you'll do. And then the last section is the tech justice sector. So you have open source communities. So, at Tech Mission, we'd go to conferences at Drupal. We learn on books on Moodle. There's open education. With City Vision, we're learning rapidly from, different groups. We're partnering with Straighterline. We're looking at what the MOOCs are doing. We're looking at edX. We're talking with people, these organizations. Then there's groups, nonprofit recruiting. So we've partnered with a lot of these groups, All for Good, Volunteer Match. There's low-cost online training resources that we're working with. Tech philanthropy, Google Grants, LinkedIn, open data, like Wikipedia, open government, job boards, secular funders. All these things are ways we should be partnering, ways that we should be learning. So for you and your organization, you're going to have those sectors. So let me go, and for this next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you. So there is an assignment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the assignment in the course, because this is a little bit complicated assignment. And what you're going to do is you're going to be using a tool called MindMap, and it's a mind map tool. If you've never used a mind map tool, you can follow some of the tutorials. And essentially what it's a way of just mapping out concepts and how they fall into a hierarchy. And the basic idea, so you should start with a mind map like this. So it's either going to be you or your organization, and you're going to have different domains of knowledge. And in Tech Mission, these somewhat relate to our programs. So it could be your programs, could be products that you're going to offer. So the domain of knowledge could be, I want to be an app developer. So that's a domain of knowledge. But then another domain of knowledge might be a particular programming language. And then it might be related to the app developer. It might be a separate thing. Then there's going to be a domain of knowledge of nonprofit, tech consulting. So you're going to figure out, how do you map those? Or you might have a domain of knowledge of how do you do education with the homeless. And, that there's going to be other domains of knowledge within that. How do you do adult education? There's GED, there's adult basic education. Then there's going to be, how do you get jobs for people who are homeless? What are the best people who in the world at getting people jobs after, they've come through a recovery program or homeless? How do you learn from them? So the whole goal of this course is to get you thinking about what are these sources? How do I connect with them? How do I network? Many of you are going to be a part of organizations that go to conferences. That should be any conference your organization goes to, any conference you go to should be a part of your network. Any domain of books that you're reading, any domain of websites that you're reading that is related to your job, then that should be, a part of this. So then you're going to have a domain of knowledge, and then you're going to have sources, and you're going to have client domains. So the source domains are going to be, where are you getting that knowledge? And your client domains are going to be, in Tech Mission's case, that was our programs. So I'm going to show you how I created a chart for this for Tech Mission. And here you can see we have Tech Mission here in the middle. And we really do two things at Tech Mission. We do education and we do recruiting. So education, that's really City Vision, and recruiting, City Vision internships and ChristianVolunteering.org. And then we have source domains and we have client domains. So, I'll focus on the recruiting side. We have, on the client domains, our main two domains are ChristianVolunteering.org, where we're trying to help people recruit volunteers, and City Vision internships, where we're trying to help people recruit interns, kind of like a Christian counterpart to AmeriCorps. Then in our source domains, we're learning about nonprofit recruiting from different groups. So Volunteer Match, Idealist, All for Good, GuideStar. That there's a sub branch of that called Volunteer Management and Recruiting, and then there's job websites. So internships.com, Simply Hired. So how do I learn about more about this space? How do I get this knowledge passed on to this community here? And then I'm doing the same thing over on the education side, where I might take the urban ministry area in education, and then I'm going to learn from people, and I already mapped this out in the other section, the Christian social sector, like CCDA, urban ministry degrees. So what I want you to do is I want you to build a mind map similar to this for yourself, and then I'll go through the other stages later. So of that project later. But what I want to do is I want to start off with, before we get into all the details of that project, I want to go to a more general model of how diffusion of innovation works for ministry to the poor. So you have the poor out there. So whatever group that is experiencing, injustice, that has less resources that are out there. And then you have groups that are ministering directly to the poor. So they're doing ministry. So there's going to be an expertise there. What is the expertise of these groups ministering to the poor? There's going to be a lot of different types of programs that you can serve. Each of those is going to be its own domain. And then to relate back to the concept of, what we were talking about before in terms of cross-cultural ministry, there's going to be an E1 or an E2 evangelism. So E1 would be where it's someone who is of the poor ministering to the poor, but they're a Christian, and they're ministering to people who are non-Christian. E2 would be someone who's not of the poor, who might come from a middle-class background, or a different racial group, or linguistic group, and they're going to be, ministering to that group. So then, with that, there's diffusion of innovation to ministries to the poor. So a lot of you are going to be part of the diffusion of innovation of tech ministry to the poor. So that's a whole specialized area. So how do you get the expertise of tech ministry to the poor? Well, part of that is your degree program, obviously. So, each of you in your map should probably have your degree program and is a part of it. But there's a lot of other groups, so each of you are going to have specialized. Some of you will want to learn from consultants that work from the poor. Some of you are going to learn from rescue missions. Some of you are going to learn from churches or other things. And then there's another group out there that you can learn from. So that's going to be Christians in secular tech. So if all we did was work with Christians with the poor, then we wouldn't be staying up with the latest technology. So, and I work with that group, and part of what I'm doing is I'm helping to educate them about justice, and then they're helping to educate me about tech, learning the latest resources. And then there's this other group that's out there that I told you, the Jesus Tech group. So this is the tech ministry, and what they're going to be doing is they're going to be thinking through a lot of the concepts around ministry and tech. So the courses that you took initially in the master's program, or going to take in the master's program around theology of technology and emerging media ministry. So that really is diffusing some of the innovations coming from the Jesus Tech group or the tech ministry group. And then you have other groups out there. So nonprofit tech, the social entrepreneurship, technology and social entrepreneurship course will be taking some of that. Secular tech. So how do we take in all of this? So this is a very general diffusion of innovation, but what you can do is you can specialize, and you can say, okay, let's ask for each of these sectors, where am I, these are boxes you should be trying to think about, where am I learning from these people? How am I learning from secular people? How am I learning from secular nonprofits? How am I learning from Christians in technology? How am I learning from Christians in secular technology? How am I learning from other technology ministries from the poor? You should be thinking about that, because really your success, and if there's any one point I want you to get, your success in your career, your success in ministry, it's going to depend on God, but it's going to depend also on how strong are your ties to each of these domains. So the more you can strengthen your ties to each of these domains, and the stronger your map is, then, for your entire life, if you're going to be a lifelong learner, what you need to be doing is you need to be thinking about, how do I make my own diffusion of innovation map stronger? How do I get more innovators in there? How do I communicate that more effectively to people? So the main ideas for this section, just to summarize, are number one, Most injustice is systemic, requiring systemic response of new institutions. So there's this huge transition from the agricultural to the industrial to the information economy. It's creating this knowledge divide, this resource divide, and we need to develop a partnership / diffusion of innovation strategy that will help determine, are we a part of the problem or a part of the solution? You know, one of the assignments is on looking at this idea of brain drain. You know, I've seen a lot of ministries to the poor, and what they do is they go minister to the poor, and they hire and they take out of the poor community the most brilliant people. And this is what universities in the United States happens all the time, where they'll take someone who's brilliant from Africa, and they'll hire them, but the problem is that person's may not be diffusing the innovations back to Africa. So the idea is that we're supposed to be a body of Christ, right? So there's nothing wrong with someone to come from Africa and to work in the United States for a university. But if the body gets cut off, then that flow is not happening. So we need to all be a part of this. So wherever you come from, you need to be diffusing innovation back there. Wherever, whatever communities you're a bridge builder across, you need to be diffusing innovation across those. So our partnership strategy will determine whether we're part of the problem or part of the solution to the knowledge divide. So, is it going to be a world where the rising tide raises all boats, or where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? Well, the reality is there is a trend in technology for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. But that's only because that's the natural momentum. We can overcome that. It's fairly easy to overcome that natural momentum. It just takes a lot of people doing it. If just 10% of Christian techs would do it, I think that would be plenty to overcome it. But the problem is most people aren't aware of the momentum and they're not overcoming it. It's a part of Howard Zinn's quote. He says, you can't be neutral on a moving train. Technology is a moving train. It is a moving train that is actually moving to make the rich richer and the poor poorer in the long haul. But you can redirect where that train's going. You can be a part of diffusing the innovation. So a key part of this is how do you decrease the cost of knowledge production, and how do you improve, a part of the idea of this innovation map is it's decreasing the cost of getting knowledge between, through you to the poor. So instead of it taking 8 steps, it could take 2 steps. You get it straight from, some source on the internet, and then you take it directly to the poor. And what we do is, I think that has the opportunity to reverse the secularization trend in education and bring justice. So, universities were invented by Christians. I think that Christians have an opportunity to take them back. And I think that that's one of the main ideas in this session. Now, in the last part, there's 2 assignments. One's focused on the brain drain. The second is focused on identifying mapping sources of clients and knowledge of innovation. So you're going to create this mind map. Then what I want you to do is to publish it on the website, and then there's a publish button on that, and then you can just create the link from that, and then summarize your mind map in your forum post. And then what I want you to do is I want you to spend most of your time writing the strategy for improving diffusion of innovation for yourself. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. I know there's a lot of material to cover that I covered in this time. If it was too much, I encourage you to pause and rewind. And if you have any questions, you can email me. Thanks. And one more thing is your final project assignment. You should be working on it. You should be, at the end of week 6, it's a good idea to be try to be close to halfway done on your project. Continue to write down your reviews. Again, don't spend too much time on your reviews of the material. Where I want you to spend your time is contacting other organizations. The whole point of this course is diffusion of innovation. One of the best ways is by contacting other people. If you're an entrepreneur, you're wasting your time if you're writing business plans. Where you're going to be learning is on the street or on the phone, talking to people. So spend your time talking to people, Find the people who are the most knowledgeable about your area, and take some notes. You can learn from their websites, but also talk to people. So you should plan to have contacted 3 organizations, or research 3 organizations that's going to be a part of this. And the idea is that in your final project, all these things, these assignments that we're doing, are building up into it. So this mind map project, it's not just a side project you're supposed to leave and forget about. Your cross-cultural dimensions, that's not a project you're supposed to leave and forget about. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to reflect more deeply into it in your final project, and to think, okay, given all these areas where I can get innovation, how do I tie that into my strategy of coming up with a project or program, or improving my project or program, to use technology to serve the poor. So again, if you have questions, come contact me.